Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar Explained video. This one is going to be primarily about how does Amon take bending away. I'm going to cover a good amount of topics here that sort of relate to it though as well. So we're going to go into sort of how bending works, and we're going to cover a lot of other examples of sort of unique bending techniques that sort of work in a similar way to Amon's technique. And of course we will address exactly what Amon does, and a little bit about, I suppose, just a whole scenario at the end of book one, and like Korra, and like how does she only have one element but three of them are blocked and stuff like that. Those sort of questions, we'll answer them all here. So let's jump in with the start of this explanation, which is simply how bending actually works. Because to understand what blocks it, we need to know, I suppose, what makes it work in the first place. So the difference between a bender and a non-bender ultimately comes down to a bender's ability to control the chi, or energy within their body, and then extend it past their body to manipulate an element. Iroh in the show gives probably the best explanation of this, the one that comes closest to like really the show directly saying this is how bending works. He says to Zuko with firebending in like the first episode, power in firebending comes from the breath, not the muscles. The breath becomes energy in the body. The energy extends past your limbs and becomes fire. So taking away the specifics for firebending, Iroh is stressing the importance of energy control and also extending that energy past the body. That's the core of bending. So it immediately presents the idea that there is something special about humans who are benders that makes them different, but we'll get into that. So the basic idea, I think, is very simple to understand just from that concept of just they have this kind of special energy that's unique to the people of the Avatar universe. Chi is just the energy of the body, but benders can also use that to manipulate the elements. So that's why we see that when benders like use their element a lot, they get tired, because they are still fundamentally using the general energy of their body that other people use just doing activity. It's that same energy fundamentally that is controlling like the physicality of the body in a way. So the basic idea is simple to understand, but some obvious questions come up. What is the difference between benders and non-benders? What allows benders to control their chi in the first place? Then with benders, what limits them to only one element? If they can all manipulate chi and extend it out, what stops a waterbender being able to manipulate earth with their chi? So if it ultimately just comes down to it's an energy manipulation technique, what actually locks them into just doing it for one element? Like what happens when a waterbender tries to use that same approach that they have with water on Earth? Like, is there some restriction? Like, how does that exactly work? So, first of all, I have this diagram here. Now, ultimately, I've explained this stuff before in like the previous video of just what the chi or chakra network actually is. And ultimately, it's a combination of these two diagrams. And you'll see a bunch of other diagrams throughout this video as well. In that, here is the location of the 7 chakra points on the body. And then you can see in the actual screenshot from the show, that's like the direction of the chi path. So you basically kind of combine these two images together and you get the kind of energy structure of the body. That there's all those kind of paths along all the different aspects of the body, but then there are specific pools of energy at specific points in the body that relate to all 7 chakra points. So we can see the locations here: crown of the head, forehead, throat, heart, stomach, sacrum, and base of the spine. But notably, and what I'm going to get into a lot here, is that you'll notice, interestingly, that the bottom 4 chakras are all named after the elements. And nothing in the show ever connects that inherently to the element, outside of something I'll address in a second. So that'll be a key part of this video in terms of, I suppose, the theory aspect of this video to explain it. But just understanding that, okay, how bending fundamentally works is benders can control the energy within their body, which means they have a good control over their chi network, which is a combination of the kind of chakra pools, big pools of energy, and then the general paths all the way along the body. So, that's just visually what's actually going on in the body. So, we'll actually take a step back here a little bit and go back to the origin of bending now. So, the line turtles were the one who gave humans the ability to bend. Each line turtle was able to grant the power of one element to any human. They give and take this ability via energy bending. They also state that humans can only hold the power of one element, but you can switch between elements in rare circumstances, like Wan and Rava prior to fusing. So she was able to pass through him, take the element that he had, give him the other one until they fused and Wan became able to actually use all four. And then we see at the end, once humans have an element, their kids have a chance to be born with bending. So the line turtles basically left a certain amount of people as permanent benders. Like obviously when they left, when the era of the Avatar started, humans were permanently left, a certain amount of humans were permanently left with the ability to bend. And the reason it continues on to this day is because they can pass it on, I suppose, genetically by having kids. And there's a chance. I'm not going to get into specifics of how exactly that works. That's probably another video, but I don't think it's all that interesting, the whole like bending and like genetic spirituality. It ultimately is a mix of the two. Spirituality really helps seemingly with children being born with bending, and then genetics also plays a certain role, but there are always exceptions. Like there's no really steadfast rules and stuff like that. So it's an interesting enough topic, but like not one we're really tackling here. Just that line turtles gave humans the ability to bend, and from there they could pass it on themselves. That this power was within them, and that's passed on when new children are born. So we can see here Wan, this is him directly getting fire for the first time. So you can see it is the energy bending technique here. He's activating something within Wan, and that's how he gets the power of fire in this case. But he also does this with all of the other four elements along the way. He just only ever holds one at a time. So it's never explained exactly what the line turtles do to a human when they give and take bending. This is where, like, when you get into the weeds enough on any of this stuff, you eventually hit a point where you're getting into such like minuscule details that you just can't explain a certain amount. But what we do know is that clearly they do not lose something in giving the power of an element to a human. We see the same line turtle giving bending to multiple people all in a row, suggesting it's more of a sense of turning on and off something within someone. Specifically, the wording that they use is that they call it the power of an element, and that you can only, and that you hold it, that you hold it within yourself. Almost like they have the essence of an element within them and can share a part or an aspect of that with a human. And this is where my theory comes in. Now, I really specify this as a theory because it's not really confirmed in the show in any way. I think it makes a whole lot of sense and helps to explain some of the more minuscule details. I think most of these explanations work without this theory, but I think this theory helps to sort of connect a few of the dots, make use of stuff that isn't overly used all that much. So here is my theory. But first, this is something I wasn't initially even planning on having part of the video, but I feel the need to just address it while we're here, just because it so often is this talking point that comes up. As for the whole original bender confusion between the line turtles and animals like dragons and badger moles, line turtles give humans the simple ability to manipulate the elements. From the original sources, dragons, sky bison, badger moles, and the moon, humans learned the form and martial art, the philosophy, to best utilize their element. Wan is given the power of fire, but only after learning from the white dragon was fire a true extension of himself. The ability of bending is a gift that is given. The form is something that is learned. Now, I know some people think, oh, this is like a retcon in some way, but a lot of ATLA, when you get towards the end of the show, they begin to reference this, like the fact that Toph explains that she learned earthbending from the badger moles, but clearly she was learning bits and pieces before because she trained with Master Yu. So very clearly they're suggesting straight away that it is not the case that the animals were the ones who directly grant humans the raw ability to bend, but rather they give them the most ideal form to get the most out of their element. It's the same with Zuko and the dragons and stuff like that. The dragons don't like directly impart any like energetic thing to Aang and Zuko in terms of they are granting them this power. They basically show them an idea. They show them a form. They show them that fire can be beautiful and can be life and not just kind of destruction. that's what they do, and that's what the whole idea of Wan learning from the dragon was about as well. That the animals, the push and pull of the moon, and so on, all of that stuff is all about the technique and form. It's not the raw ability. And I think the problem that I have with a lot of people who kind of feel that Avatar really pushed the idea that the original benders like literally gave humans the ability to bend is that we never have really any example of this. Any example of a badger mole doing something to a human that like suddenly turns on this power within them. A dragon doing something to a human that turns on the power of firebending. A sky bison for air. And especially like the moon, outside of just the fact that the moon spirit, Tui, and then Yue allow waterbending to even exist, the moon doesn't directly, like, it doesn't impart the ability upon someone like individually. So it's just more of the technique and philosophy behind the kind of element. So, you know, a lot of people were asking me like, can you do a video specifically on this topic? I often don't feel I need to, because it's explained like super clearly within the show, and it tends to be, for me, one of the few things that just kind of makes me go like, can we actually have a conversation here about Avatar? Like, do you really not get this? Like, we're at a big kind of impasse here if this is like something that you have a trouble dealing with, because it kind of tends to be this very telling thing about how people treat the lore of ATLA versus the lore of Korra. Korra is much clearer, much more direct about it. ATLA is very, very vague about this sort of stuff. And a lot of the confusion comes in from like stuff like the Cave of Two Lovers, where I think this is actually the only time it's specifically stated in the show that there's any sort of confusion about this is the Oma and Shu thing, and that Oma and Shu are specifically stated, I think, by Katara reading off the wall that Oma and Shu learned from the badger moles, and like they became the first earthbenders. In that, like, you have to then kind of get very technical here to explain it. Like, ultimately you can explain it away in that the backstory of Oma and Shu wasn't told directly from their perspective, like, say, Kyoshi's backstory with Jin the Conqueror was told directly by her. It was people who wrote this after the fact on the walls of this cave. So, did they know the full story, the full specifics? Not exactly. The idea has to be that Oma and Shu had the ability to bend prior. They just learned the true technique, the powerful technique from the badger moles, and that's why that whole thing happens, that they learned the specific technique. So, in essence, you know, you are only truly a bender when you apply a good like form to it. That's why I think in beginnings they call it like you know, they're fire throwers or something like that. They use terminology like that. They don't use bending yet. So Wan learning to make fire an extension of himself is the first time that I suppose someone truly becomes a bender, where they're in control, there's a form to it, it's part of them, they understand the philosophy. I probably lingered on this too long, but just to get that point across to anyone who struggles with it, I wanted to get it across. Now, the theory I've been talking about, here it is. So I just call it the activated chakra point theory, and here it is basically. So 4 of the chakras are named after the elements, yet no explanation has been given for this. Yes, the philosophy of the elements matches how you block each chakra, but does fear and survival mean that like it has to be called earth? Like, is the chakra called that because it relates to earth, or is there something more? Is it called earth because actually that specific chakra is important to earthbending? And that's what this whole theory is about. This is a kind of an aspect that's never really explained in the show, so I'm taking this kind of almost coincidence of there being 4 elemental chakras and using that to explain some of the questions I asked earlier on. So my theory is to use these 4 chakras to explain what separates a bender from a non-bender and benders of one element from another. In short, the idea is that a firebender's fire chakra is different or activated. And we continue on here. Activated should be treated as being different than having that chakra open. Anyone, bender or non-bender, can open their chakras. I linked this to what the line turtles do. They use the elemental power they have to activate the chakra that matches the element that they can give. This is where a human holds the power of the element. So they hold the power of the element from the line turtle within the chakra point of that specific element that a line turtle can give. So for Wan, he is given the power of fire, and the line turtle basically, through the energy bending, places that power of fire within the fire chakra point to activate it. Since the chakra is a giant pool of energy within the body, this newly activated chakra now alters the chi in the body so that the human can manipulate it and connect to just their specific element. And here's some diagrams to get that across visually. So the first one you can see here on the left, just some kind of really bad drawings of like the human body, and then the blue line is just meant to represent a really basic version of the chi paths throughout the body, just kind of showing that they flow up all the limbs and even to the head. So non-bender, they still have chi, just no way to control it. Their chi is just the body's energy. So when they move around and stuff like that, they still use their chi. It's not just there for show. And also non-benders still have, chakras. So the idea here is just that non-benders don't have as much of a use for their chi, but it's still important. It's still an aspect of all beings in the Avatar universe. So then the firebender example here. So their fire chakra is in the stomach. That's where the location of the fire chakra, as we know, is activated. This affects their chi so that it can interact with fire, but no other element. And the way I demonstrate this here is obviously the red circle is the chakra point, and then stemming out from that, you can see basically the chi. But the chi sort of has this sort of like fire kind of power in a way, like associated with it. The power of the element sort of affects the entire chi path in a way, so that their chi specifically can interact just with fire because they were given that specific power from one of the line turtles. And then the earth example is just meant to demonstrate that in a different chakra point, in a different location, specifically in this case the earthbender example, the earth chakra, which is in the base of the spine, is activated. And this is what allows their chi to interact with earth. And I show this, of course, by having the sort of green kind of energy from the chakra point be sort of interlaced with the chi, as if it's like earth chi, kind of like that in a way. Now obviously the idea is ultimately that like chi when used is ultimately kind of invisible. So this is this kind of like more or less invisible process that happens, that this energy sort of invisibly affects the chi, but this is what allows the connection to happen and what gets around the problem of what differentiates a non-bender from a bender, and then also what differentiate benders of each type from each other. I think it's a really nice and kind of simple solution to that problem, using something that we already have, and using a kind of, in a way, mysterious kind of thing of just the fact that there are all these chakra points from the different elements related to each other, in that this sort of helps to explain to us things like Aang when he's learning earthbending. Why can't he earthbend right up until that last moment? And it relates to the philosophy in the same way that it's blocked by fear and kind of deals with survival in a way. Survival and the ability to kind of withstand kind of the pressure is the kind of core aspect of what you would consider most earthbenders to be. And then fear is the obvious block for that. The approach they take in Bitter Work is kind of Aang, just in general, has more of an airbender philosophy, so he tends to sort of like avoid and evade his problems instead of directly standing up to them. So for the earth chakra, that is sort of seen as fear for Aang, that he can't stand up to something. He is afraid of the direct conflict, and so in a way, even though his earth chakra is active, it is blocked by this kind of philosophy, this kind of understanding for him, because we know that basically sort of like mental, philosophical, or spiritual issues can impact the physicality of your body, in that Zuko goes into a coma because of a tough decision he makes, the Earth King, and so on. So this is kind of another example of that, of like, he literally can't earthbend until he understands the philosophy, because that's what the earth chakra deals with. And in a way, like, you sort of ask the question then, like, is the philosophy because of the chakra point or vice versa? But either way, I think this is a nice explanation to get that across. As for the Avatar has all 4 elemental chakras active. This is possible because Wan and his reincarnations are unique humans with the ability to control a huge amount of energy within their body. The energy limit that the line turtles talk about, with the whole idea that humans can only hold the power of one element, suggests that having one element energizes your chi and chi network so much that having a second element also within the body would overload the chi network, in the same way that, like, say, when Wan tries to go into basically the Avatar state prior to fusing with Rava, she says that it will kill him because it's basically an overload of energy. At that point, he's just a normal human who's done a little bit of training to contain more energy in his body. All of a sudden, Rava going inside means he has the power of 4 elements within him and a really powerful light spirit, all like trying to burst basically his energy system apart. And that's why harmonic convergence is so important, because it changes Wan and his reincarnations into just being able to contain huge amounts of energy. So now we know more or less on a technical level how bending works. Now we can get to answering some of the questions that we kind of had at the start. So these are the ones we're going to answer along the way. So first of all, how does chi blocking work? Secondly, how does waterbending healing work? The third is the main one here. How does Amon take bending away? Related to that, how did Korra airbend after she had her bending taken? And also, how does Aang take bending away? So a lot of different questions. So chi blocking is the simplest one. I think it's a simple enough concept, but here's the idea. Visually, you get the idea that a pinpoint physical blows disable both the muscles and also blocks specific chi paths. We've gone through the whole idea of the chi path, and that, like, characters like Ty Lee are knowledgeable about the chi system and can hit you with pinpoint strikes at exact positions to disable chi to, like, your whole arm, your whole leg, or something like that, as well as doing damage to the muscles, so that you can't. It's not just that, like, you can't bend, but your arm is suddenly rendered useless, so you can't even, like, physically combat them either. Hence why we often see benders' arms go limp when they get hit in, like, the upper arm, because it attacks the muscles and also the chi paths. Now, I apologize for this diagram. I really couldn't come up with a great way to, like, show it in a sort of simple, basic diagram format. I think you get the idea, even though it's kind of crude here. Or just like this, the little black line is meant to sort of be the skin, the orange box is more of like the muscle, and then kind of like interlaced throughout the muscle along all the body basically is where the chi paths are. So when a strike comes in, and that's what I'm using the kind of grey box for, it basically comes in and just kind of like, it's pinpoint, but like this is on such a small scale that we're talking about here, that it still kind of crushes basically this whole system. So the skin sort of compresses into the muscle, and the strike basically hits home deeper than just the outside kind of layer. And the effect that this has is obviously that it does some damage to the muscles, like temporarily kind of stopping you from being able to use it. And this also results in sort of the temporary sort of blockage or closure of the chi paths. And then over time, the flow is restored. That's why we sort of get the explanation that, like, it'll wear off eventually and stuff like that. It's why healing doesn't have too much of an effect on chi blocking. Like, I assume it speeds up the time, but, like, there's no instantaneous, like, you just heal the area and it immediately just fixes it. Chi blocking is that sort of a thing where it just is the kind of body almost repairing itself. But this is just a simple one. You get the idea of a physical attack also being able to just hit so far in that it damages the chi network as well. So here's some visuals of that. Here is Ty Lee. Notice the way she kind of leads with kind of like the one of the joints basically of one of her fingers here. So she doesn't like punch Azula here in the kind of upper arm. She kind of uses kind of the knuckles of her fingers to do this. And you can see here she just really kind of compresses the top area of Azula's arm, and that blocks her chi in that arm and also does damage to the muscles. Similarly, when the technique is first introduced in 203, we get to see this fairly up close when she chi blocks Katara here. So you can see here, she uses her fingers this time to do it right on the shoulder for Katara, and then also right kind of just above the elbow here. And this basically renders Katara's arms kind of useless and she can't bend after this. So that's the idea of chi blocking. It's a simple enough concept. The second question we had was how waterbending healing works. So you can see here a really cool diagram, but here's the explanation. The idea here is that a waterbender channels the chi of an injured person towards the injured area. They do this by having the chi move towards the water that they use to heal. The water draws chi towards an injury. This is why the water glows, to show that the energy or chi is active. Increased flow of chi is what accelerates healing. And visually you can see that here. You have the general kind of body that I've been using here, the chi path, which is the blue lines, and then the blue arrows with the sort of darker blue outline is like flow of chi. So, and then you can see the red star is meant to sort of be the injury to the arm, whatever it be, whether that be a cut or a broken bone or something like that. And then the transparent blue is the water that the waterbender is using to heal that injury. So that's outside the body, that's being activated, and the chi begins to come in, and the glow is obviously what's happening there, and it's just basically channeling as much chi as possible from like the surrounding areas of the body towards that injured area to basically accelerate the natural healing process of the body. And that's basically how it works. It's a simple enough process to explain, but this diagram I was fairly happy with, because I think it gets the idea across pretty clearly. And there's a reason, of course, that I wanted to talk about this as well, because it relates to sort of Amon's technique in a way. So here's a screenshot from the show that gets to the cross. You can see the water is glowing. It's not just normal water. Healing does make the water glow. So Bolin gets a badly bruised or potentially separated shoulder, and Korra begins to heal it here with the water, and it's glowing and stuff like that. She's of course moving it around as well on the outside, so it's not just a case of you leave it in place and it heals. So I assume the movement on the outside also helps to accelerate the movement of the chi, and that like they're moving the water around, which helps the chi to begin flowing and so on. But you get the idea. So now the main event, basically. How does Amon take bending away? The answer is that he doesn't take bending away, but rather blocks chi in a way that is basically irreversible. The way he does this is by doing the opposite of healing, cutting off and blocking the chi paths rather than opening them up. The key point here is that he does it via blood bending. So he's cutting off chi paths using the water in his victim's body. He doesn't have to use outside water, like on the outside of the skin, and then like try and target within. He, as a bloodbender, and especially because he's a psychic bloodbender with the ability to bloodbend at any point of the day, the moon doesn't need to be full for him to bloodbend. So that's what makes his technique kind of so potent, and in a way why he is one of the only people in the world capable of doing a technique like this, because any other waterbender can only kind of get close to this technique by practicing during a full moon. So Amon is one of the few. That's why this is such a rare technique, and why in a way it kind of has to be so unique to him, and why it's effectively irreversible, because the counterpoint to this, obviously we'll discuss in a second, but that's what it is. It's blood bending reverse healing is kind of one way to kind of put it. Of he is activating parts of the water within people's bodies and kind of channeling chi away, closing paths, blocking them, and completely cutting off an element in that way. So he manages to make it seem like he's actually taking away the ability to bend by basically sealing off a bender's active chakra point. So we'll get into, I suppose, the exact reasoning behind this, because this is not made particularly clear in the show. This is probably one of the weakest parts of Book 1 Air, is that really they don't make any attempt to explain this. So we know that this is the case because of the Book 1 Air art book. Mike says in one of the notes in that book, Noah, he talks about it in a whole other paragraph, but the idea is referring to Noah talk, figures out how to use bloodbending to disrupt a bender's chi, making it impossible for them to bend. Brian explained it more in depth in an interview. He says, Amon used bloodbending, the act of bending the fluid inside one's body, to break these meridians in key places, severely disturbing or blocking the chi's flow and impairing one's ability to bend. If you look up the term meridian, it basically just means chi path. So meridian, just replace that with chi path, and you get the terminology I've been using across this explanation. They never used the term meridian in the show, but like chi path is roughly been said in the show. Also, the visuals when he takes Lightning Bolt Zolt's bending away also points towards this interpretation. This is probably the most obvious example of like this is kind of the way it has to be from the show. So when he takes down Zolt here, he gets behind him, grabs the arm that he's using lightning bending with, and then activates the technique. So you can see here, as he has his hands in the position to perform the technique, as he does, which is on the forehead and so on, Lightning Bolt Zolt is still firing lightning. A really high level firebender technique. Very powerful. And then a second later, what you see happen is this. The lightning goes away and it turns into normal fire. And then a second later, it just goes away completely. His bending is gone and he tries to get up and bend again and he can't. So the point I'm making here is that if he was just directly like the line turtle taking away someone's bending, the bending would just be gone. You just see it go from lightning to nothing. So the fact that it's like slowly turning off the tap in a way. Lightning is when you have it on full blast, and slowly, you're closing it. It's fire, and then it goes away. So to me, that goes into the whole idea of him, internally chi blocking someone, and specifically targeting what makes them able to firebend. So, that's definitely an interesting one. I think that's a nice kind of visual way to kind of show that from the show. So here's a diagram that I have here. Again, this is kind of hard to show in a diagram, but for me, Amon uses this ability to cut off bending while cutting as few chi paths as possible. If he cut off chi flow to every part of the body, the victim would be in a much more serious position than not just being able to bend. So I feel he targets the areas directly around the active chakra point rather than cutting off flow to completely to the arms and legs. And as you can see here again in the diagram, there's the chi path. In this case, it's the firebender example, so activated fire chakra, so say for Lightning Bolt Zolt. And then the dark blue lines is what I consider to be the blood-bending chi blocks. And I consider it to be more of a case of him really focusing on the fact that, Lightning Bolt Zolt is a firebender. I need to specifically target the area around the fire chakra, and that will be what cuts off his connection to firebending, without doing so much damage that it comes across as if I have just chi blocked him. Because it's not a case of his muscles are unable to use their limb. All benders, when they seem to get their bending taken away, are temporarily seem like they're just low on energy because this kind of whole power source has just been turned off. But some of them are kind of able to recover quickly enough, and especially with the Korra example I'll get into a bit later on, it seems clear enough. But that's what I consider to be the case of just him. It's more of an accurate technique rather than a wide scope technique, because he always does it fairly quickly. He doesn't spend a ton of time there holding onto the person's forehead and spending minutes okay, let's turn off the arm, left leg, right leg, and the chakra point. No, it's just really quick, 2 seconds, it's done. And to me, that speaks to the fact that he has to do it fairly quickly, and so he targets the core rather than everything. So, we know Amon used his technique on Korra. She could not bend after he did this to her. So how was she suddenly able to airbend? For me, the fact that Korra does airbend proves my point earlier about Amon targeting the root or source of bending within his targets rather than blocking large amounts of their chi network. He can only target active parts of her chi network. This explains how she cannot bend fire, water, or earth. At this point, Korra has never ever used earthbending in her whole life. Amon either assumes she has some sort of block already, or was unable to target something that had never been used before. Regardless, the core idea here is that Amon didn't or couldn't block an ability that Korra had never actually used before. Also, he had never ever blocked airbending before, so he may not have been used to targeting the air chakra. That's another interesting point as well. He never actually gets a chance to take anyone's airbending away before. So Korra is the first person he comes across who even has the ability to airbend, but she also hasn't ever used it before. So the air aspect of her chi network system has never really been used. So how can he actually target and turn something off like that? And I think that's kind of the point here in all of this. So as for how Korra suddenly was able to use airbending, clearly this fully confirms Amon's technique does not completely shut down the chi network, in that Korra is able to airbend with seemingly no restriction in the aftermath of all of this. Right just before, obviously, she goes off and has her connection with Aang, she's basically confirmed that you can still airbend perfectly fine. The only problem with you is that your connection to the other three elements has been severed. So that confirms directly to us that Amon's technique doesn't just chi block the entire body, it is super targeted. The only issue being that her access to the three elements is gone. It is a character reason as to why it happened specifically at this point. Aang's explanation roughly explains it. When we hit our lowest point, we are open to the greatest change. She stands up to defend Mako even though her bending is gone. Her bending has so often defined her and her power, but she faces a villain she is afraid of with no bending, all to protect someone else. This change is what awakens her airbending and spiritual connection. Because we know she's dealt with the fact that she's kind of been afraid of Amon earlier this season. Episode 4 made that super clear. Her bending very much has been the super defining aspect of who she is as a very physical avatar. But the fact that she still stands up to be so sort of heroic, to defend someone else, to stop this from happening to Mako, that kind of selflessness in that, the bravery, all the combination of those things is what unlocks the airbending and also the spiritual connection at the same time. And here's that happening at this moment. You can see she's not even kind of looking. It's pure desperation, doing anything that she can, and it just happens to happen at this point. So, as for how Korra gets the other three elements back, the simple answer is energy bending. And I suppose for the sake of this video, I'm not trying to overly explain energy bending, because it's such a vague and widespread topic. The techniques that energy bending has are just kind of so specific that there's no obvious way to explain them. So it's just okay, every energy bending technique just treat it as okay, it does what it does. So Korra has connected to her past lives at the end of book 1. And Aang learned energy bending, so that means Korra also knows it, because we know the kind of the reincarnations of Wan, all of the kind of abilities that each one learns sort of passes, in a way sort of passes on to the next kind of. So what Aang does here is that he basically shows Korra how to do this technique that it was taught to him by doing it on her. On a technical level, energy bending is what unblocks the blockages and heals any damage that Amon did with his bloodbending blocking technique. They specifically note healing could not fix this because Katara couldn't do anything with it. But an interesting thought is, if Katara had enough time, say during a full moon, could she use healing with bloodbending to learn how to heal what Amon did? So the counterpoint, obviously, if Amon's ability is sort of reverse healing, what if Katara managed to use bloodbending healing to do that? And then just the concept of bloodbending healing is really interesting to me. I'd love to know if that is actually possible, because bloodbending is often so often seen as just this kind of dangerous technique, but I'd love to know if bloodbending healing is actually something that's possible, because that way all you have to do is literally where are you injured, and you just activate the technique within them. And because it's so targeted and specific inside the body, I assume that would accelerate healing all the more, rather than trying to use water on the outside of someone's body to manipulate chi around like normal healing works now. But again, the idea is that they only have a couple of hours with the full moon, I suppose, to do that. How could anyone, like, kind of master that enough? But, that's how Hama learned the technique in the first place. If someone devoted themselves to this, I think it's an interesting idea for sure. So here is, of course, Aang doing the sort of energy bending on Korra, and this like fixes her problem with the other elements, which we know was just some sort of chi blocking. So it makes sense that the literal ability that with the line turtles can give and take bending can fix issues with someone's kind of chi path network, because it is the technique that is literally called energy bending. Of course, it can affect stuff on someone's like energy system within their body. So last but not least, how does Aang take bending away? Again, the answer is energy bending, and it's more or less already been covered, since it is just the line turtle's ability to take back bending. I consider this to be truly taking bending away. That's why, like, with Amon, I always had a take in like inverted commas, because he wasn't actually taking it. This is not just some form of sealing or blocking of bending, but fully removing a person's ability to bend. In the theory, the activated chakra point theory, deactivating a bender's active chakra point by removing the power that impacts a person's chi network. They still have chi and chakras, but no longer the ability to manipulate their chi, because the power that allows that to happen has been taken from them directly. And here's visually, as we can see it happening. We know that this is more of a kind of visual thing for the audience, in that, like, when he takes, say, Yakon's bending away, the same thing doesn't happen. So it is more of a case of, this is kind of, if you could see the kind of invisible energy happening, this is kind of what's happening. You have to have this sort of energy fight with someone, that your spirit has to be unbendable if you want to bend someone else's energy. You have to have such control over yours to justify being able to bend someone else's, and that's the kind of caveat to the technique, and why it can only be used sort of cautiously in a way. So that's what happens there. And of course, like, Korra learns the ability to give people back their bending because it's just unsealing people's chi paths, basically. It's not... The Avatar, as far as we are aware, is never given the ability to just give people bending. If that was the case, Aang or Korra would just be making people airbenders if they wanted to be. There's no real explanation given to this beyond that, like, okay, there is something special about line turtles, about like where or how, or just the nature of them, where they get the power of the element from, and what exactly it is within them that is able to just, for them to so easily give and take that energy. Obviously, they're huge animals, and so they must have a huge chi network themselves, and that might explain it. Whereas I suppose for Aang, I suppose they're basically kind of saying that maybe there's just a limit to the amount of energy even the Avatar can, deal with. That they can't give someone energy, the element, because just that there's just that sort of limit. Also, I do get the sort of impression that it's sort of a technique that the line turtles used, that there was sort of a bit of hesitation from them in terms of like that, and that's why the whole wand thing happened in the first place, because he stole basically the power that the line turtles were initially just lending to humans. But anyway, we're getting a bit sidetracked here right at the end, but a lot of this kind of later stuff is just kind of energy bending, and energy bending just like, it just fixes energy stuff. There's no real kind of better explanation on most energy bending stuff than that. So, I'll just end by saying, let me know if there are any topics you would like to see covered in this Avatar Explained series. I know there's still some like lingering ones that people said in previous videos, but continue to recommend them to me so I don't forget or anything like that. I know there's still a few more topics to be covered, but just be aware of stuff like, if you want me to do like a line turtle explained, I don't really have a lot to explain about line turtles, because like so much of that video would be theory and speculation. Like, by all means, if you want to see a line turtle theory and explanation video, I kind of already have one. So if you want to know more of my thoughts on line turtles, I have a link to a video about them in the description. It's not as, I suppose, organized as this. It's more of a just, I sit down, talk randomly about line turtles for like half an hour. But if you want that, it's there. I feel if trying to do an explained video on the line turtles would be kind of lying in that there's only so much to explain before you're just immediately speculating and theorizing. So definitely give me some suggestions, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.